We've had dinner, we've had our bath, we've brushed our teeth, we've got into our pyjamas, we've got into bed, so I guess that means it's time for my favourite part of the day, bedtime story time. And tonight I'm going to read you An Evening at Alfie's by Shirley Hughes, because growing up it was one of my favourite books, so I guess it's time for me to tell the story to you. So here we go. An Evening at Alfie's. One cold winter's evening, Alfie and his little sister Annie Rose were all ready for bed. Mum and Dad were all ready to go out, and Mrs. McNally's Maureen was in the living room. She had come to look after Alfie and Annie Rose whilst Mum and Dad were at the party. Alfie and Maureen waved goodbye to them from the window. Annie Rose was already in her cot. Soon she settled down and went to sleep. Alfie liked Maureen. She always read him a story when she came to babysit. Tonight, Alfie wanted the story about Noah and his ark, full of animals. Alfie liked to hear how the rain came drip, 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 and then splash, 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 until it flooded everywhere and the whole world was covered in water. When Maureen had finished the story, it was time for Alfie to go to bed. She came upstairs to tuck him in. They had to be very quiet and talk in whispers because Annie Rose was already asleep. Maureen gave Alfie a good night hug and went off downstairs, leaving the door a little bit open. Alfie didn't feel sleepy. He lay in bed looking at the patch of light on the ceiling. For a long time, all was quiet. Then, he heard a noise coming from the landing outside. Alfie sat up. The noise was just outside his door. Drip, drip, drip. Soon, it got quicker. It changed to drip, 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 drip. It was getting louder too. Alfie got out of his bed and peeped around the door. There was a puddle on the floor. He looked up. Water was splashing into the puddle from the ceiling. Drip, 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 drip. It was raining inside the house. Alfie went downstairs. Maureen was doing her homework in front of the TV. "It's raining on the landing," Alfie said. Alfie and Maureen went back upstairs. The puddle was getting bigger. The drip, 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 drip had turned into a splash, splash, splash. Looks like a burst pipe," said Maureen. A plumber was one of the things she wanted to be when she left school. "Better get a bucket," she said. So Alfie showed her where the bucket was kept, in the kitchen cupboard with the brushes and the brooms. But now the water was dripping down in another place. Alfie and Maureen found two of Mum's big mixing bowls and put them underneath the drips. Maureen got on the telephone to her mum. The McNallys lived just across the street, so her mum was there in no time. Oh dear, it's ruining your mother's floor," cried Mrs. McNally. "Fetch some floor cloths, Maureen." Just then Annie Rose woke up and began to cry. "Shh, shh, there," said Mrs. McNally, bending over the cot. But Annie Rose only looked at her and cried even louder. Mrs. McNally ran back out to the landing. She and Maureen tried to mop up all the water, but now it was coming from lots of different places. Splash, splash, splash. "We ought to turn the water off from the mains," said Maureen. "But I don't know how you do it. I think I'd better fetch Dad." While she was gone, Mrs. McNally mopped and emptied brimming bowls, and in between mopping and emptying, she was trying to comfort Annie Rose. But Annie Rose went on crying and crying. The drips on the landing came faster and faster. Now there were a lot of puddles on the floor. Alfie paddled in them for a while, but soon they got quite cold. He thought that soon perhaps the whole street would be covered with water, and they would all have to float away on a boat just like Noah in his ark. Soon Maureen came running upstairs with Mr. McNally close behind her, wearing his bedroom slippers. "What's all this then?" said Mr. McNally, looking at all the water pouring down. He put his head round the bedroom door. He and Annie Rose were old friends. "Dear, dear, what's all this then?" he said in a very kind voice. Then he went downstairs and found a large sort of tap under the stairs and turned it off. "Oh, so that's where it is," said Maureen. Then the water stopped pouring down through the ceiling, splash, 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 and became a drip, 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 and then a drip, 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 and then it stopped altogether. "Oh, thank goodness for that," said Mrs. McNally. "I'll know how to do it next time," said Maureen. But Annie Rose was still crying. Alfie went into the bedroom to see if he could cheer her up. Tears were rolling down her cheeks and soaking into her blankets. "Don't cry, Annie Rose," said Alfie, and he put his hand through the bar and patted her gently because he'd seen Mummy do this to calm her down. Annie Rose still wore nappies at night. "Annie Rose is wet," Alfie told everyone. "And her bed's wet too. I expect that's why she's crying." "Why, so she is, poor little mite," said Mrs. McNally. When Annie Rose was all dry and comfortable again, Mrs. McNally put her in the living room on the sofa next to Alfie and tucked a quilt around them. Then she gave them both a biscuit. Annie Rose was quite cheerful now. She got very friendly with Mr. McNally, and he let her play a game with him, taking off his glasses and putting them on again. Then she sucked her thumb and leaned up against Alfie, and Alfie leaned up against her, and by the time that Mum and Dad arrived home from the party, they were both fast asleep. Next morning, Mum told Alfie not to turn on the taps until the plumber had been to fix the problem. Alfie didn't mind though. He'd had enough water the night before to last him for a long time. The end. Wow, what an adventure Alfie went on! All that water splish-splashing inside his house. It's tired me out though reading that story, so I guess all that's left to do is turn off the light, cuddle up to our teddy bear, get under our blanket, and say I will see you tomorrow when we'll be in the kitchen making some really fun little Easter cakes. Night night, sweet dreams. In the story, there was lots of dripping water. What can we use water for? When you wake up, draw a picture of yourself splashing in puddles. What different sounds are in the story?